Hello, I'm Bart.
And I'm David. Welcome back.
We actually just had a great conversation with David about digital visual literacy. What I like about this conversation, David, is that we arrive at this model, this visual representation of our conversation, which is a tree.
Yes, it's a wonderful organic metaphor for cultivating all these capacities that make up the roots and growing that into this discipline, this practice, and then ultimately, the branches, the twigs, the foliage, the leaves manifest in this fabulous crown. And within that crown are all these rewards, the fruit, which we want everybody as soon as possible, with just a little bit of practice, to harvest and enjoy.
So the new possibilities, right? That DVL opens. Mm-hmm.
That's right. And in the process of our exchanging information and having this dialogue and emerging this tree, we found that our interaction was very much like a dance. So we thought we would represent that interchange, that exchange of information and viewpoints, as you see right here.
Which kind of fits the tree, right? So
yes, we're celebrating as well as getting there. It's part of the overall cultivation.
So we invite you now to see this conversation, how this model came about. So David, as we were talking, what is digital visual literacy for you, and why is it so important today to have those skills?
Well, it is really the beginning question, and therefore, why do we want to invest time in learning it? And I think that essentially DVL is a mindset and a capacity that is naturally coming about. It's a technological capacity, an innate capacity that we have to visualize things, right? We're gifted with sight and all that sight has going for it. And we have the mindset of using pictures along with words whenever we have something important to think about or consider or plan or communicate, right? It's not just one or the other, it's both. We want to use both. And that is the mindset. And the capacity that we now have is that we have all of technology working for us and, developing the practice of using pictures alongside words and using vision alongside language. To me, that's, and why do that? Well, like I was doodling around earlier in this little thing right here. and the reason why we need to do that is because we need better ways to deal with reality, which is largely made of things that we can't necessarily see with our eyeballs, right? So we depend on screens and pictures that other people generate to show us the flow of money, what's going on in our bodies, politics and climate change. And there's just so much about our world today that affects us that we have to deal with, that we can't see directly with our own eyes.
It might be because our eyes are, quite strong in terms of dealing with complexity. The sense of sight evolved to deal with the complexity of environment. And now we're using it to map not only terrain, but also abstract ideas. Why don't we show some examples?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So this is kind of like a first component to what we call DVL, right? Shall we call it what? A primacy of sense of sight?
Yeah, it all starts with our vision, how we visualize things. And sometimes we visualize things in our minds before we even can see them on paper or through a picture, right? So it's our capacity to see things here inside that may not involve what we physically see with our eyes.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
You know, and then that capacity extends to any kind of map that you can possibly come up with, right? Any kind of representation. And we quickly see that so much of what guides our behavior are representations of some kind.
So I'm representing a space. I'm actually here. That's the city of Wrocław. That's my tiny example of how quickly we can decode meanings, locations, positions using such representation, right? It's just super simple. Yeah, exactly. But not only locations can be mapped, we now map everything from circuits, like on this example here, to social media networks, like here, to even complex ideas, like on this 3D visualization that I have right here, right? These are all benefits of the power of our sense of sight, which I checked. There's a good article about the comparison between the speed of processing of information between verbal and visual. And I don't know if you know that, but we can decode up to 10 messages, visual messages per second. That's quite astonishing, isn't it?
Yes, considering we can't really take in 10 different ideas through words per second.
Exactly.
What we can take in visually is like this big a pipe compared to how we take in other things, right? And that's what's amazing about our basic human capacity in thinking terms. But, you know, we never learn any of this in school, Bart. I didn't ever have a class or a conversation or a discussion about how our sense of vision controls our thinking. Who?
You have fragments of that in design thinking, you know, art classes, but these are just little fragments. So that's why we're inviting you to explore how you can use this powerful sense of sight. And that's first component of what we call digital visual literacy. So that's great, David. What's next?
And I want to just throw this out, this picture here, because this picture here depicts the science that we now have in neuroscience, right? To actually track what's going on in the brain. And kind of like you were saying earlier, brain scientists now show us that a very dominant portion of brain activity is linked to our sense of vision. We're not aware of that. It's just happening automatically. So when we talk about the primacy of vision, including all of these things, right?
You were saying that we're wired for visual.
Yes. Correct.
Yeah. That's a great example. All right. So what next?
So if we let's build on that, and let's look at one of those capacities we have, one of those attributes, which is that, you know, simultaneously with our vision, our visual powers, we can look at an enormously big picture, and then in a split second, we can focus on something that's very, very tiny and specific.
Right. So you're referring here to two types of thinking: being focused on details or having the context, right? The wider perspective, so to say.
The wider, bigger perspective is the context. It's the whole enchilada, or all the things that are important and that affect how we're looking at that one smaller piece of content. So I can pick up a piece of paper on my desktop and I can just be looking for one little idea on that piece of paper, or I can look at the whole desktop and scan it, and I can do that almost simultaneously.
Yes, yeah.
Because of this power.
And I believe we have these days we're using a lot of tools that get us very deep into details, and we're starting to lose this. It's sometimes called the right hemisphere type of thinking, right? The holistic thinking.
Right.
And if you'd like, I can demonstrate that using piece of art. Do you like art, David?
I love art. Demonstrate away, my friend.
All right. Okay. So here we go. Do you recognize this fragment of painting?
Well, I sure recognize those brush strokes. That is, unless I'm mistaken, that is Vincent van Gogh.
That's exactly right. So here I'm showing a fragment of a painting, and this is my visual representation of how focused we are on details without paying much attention to the surroundings. It makes a lot of sense if you look at this frame, but this is just a fragment of a larger
yes.
whole.
Wow.
Right?
And
if I do this,
yes.
or even do that, we have
right.
The devices that allow us to change perspectives, to go into details, and get this so-called helicopter view, right?
Yes.
Without losing it from our side. So we can actually switch between those two modes of focused,
right, and
holistic thinking.
And I just want to pause for a second to point out something that's pretty awesome because of this comparison here, right? Because you put these two things side by side and you flipped, right? My brain does this instantaneous comparison, right?
Yeah.
Instantaneously, I say, oh, that's just a part of this much larger thing.
Yeah.
So my brain does this whole number on the relationship between the little thing and the big thing. And that process of comparison or judgment or evaluation, that's going on all the time.
Yeah.
In everybody.
But I guess you already know what is the relation of this example to business world.
And I just want to call that sense making, because sometimes we can't we can't make sense, really good sense of the little detail, the little bit of content, until we have this much bigger picture.
Exactly. Right? That's where I'm heading. So in my business analogy, if we take this conversation to the business level,
next level, right?
We'd like to look at bullet points on a slide without having this context, this wider scope in front of us, not being accessible because we're constrained to this space of a single slide with bullet points. And this makes us, prone for manipulation. Right. Because we're not making sense of all of those connections and relations to bigger whole.
No, I'm just going to demonstrate what you're saying. Right. So if this was a PowerPoint slide, I would say, here we have the clouds, right? And here we have the tree, and here we have the field. We're constrained to what we're showing right here, which is good. It's useful to have both the words and the pictures, but there's even something bigger to this, and we'll go into that later. There's even a bigger context for what you've drawn here, but we won't go into that now, because what this is exciting, but I think we need to even pull out further and say that if we're going to accept that we have new tools, new capacities, a new approach here, what is it that, what's the reason for thinking of this as a hybrid form of literacy? Like, why go that big? Why not just say, okay, these are nice tools, this is good. I think I'll investigate further, but why actually think of this as a new form of literacy and all that means? I think that's an important question.
It is.
And so what I would suggest is that our most common reference about literacy, right? If we take just the idea of what is literacy, well, most people would tell you that it's the ability to read and to write and to speak. Well,
it's a combination of skills, right?
It's a combination of skills. And with that combination of skills, we move around in the world, right? We maneuver, we navigate, we accomplish things, we solve problems, we interact with people with that set of skills. And we have to have that rudimentary set of skills.
Mm-hmm. And since we're in the 21st century, it's worth asking what set of skills prepares us for challenges of today and tomorrow. And I don't know if you're aware of that, but there was this partnership of 21st century skills that combined those organizations and companies to work together in order to come up with a list of skills for facing tomorrow.
Okay, yeah, that's a great assembly of companies and organizations. That's lots of credibility there.
So do you want to see what sort of list they created?
Please.
Yeah, coming. So here's the table. And tell me how many of those skills you recognize when you're thinking about digital visual literacy.
Well, of course, right away, we see digital literacy.
Yeah.
Right?
We see communications, collaboration, what we're doing now, I wonder.
Yeah. I love this stuff that talks about flexibility and adaptability, right? And leadership.
Critical thinking, problem solving. It's all about what we call DVL. It's all about it.
It is. And so I think that it's no small thing that we're calling this literacy, because when we're combining words and pictures, when we're thinking of this as a mindset that increases our capacity, then we see it's a way for us to act more effectively in the world with other people, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We're utilizing the resources that may not be fully realized today. And don't we want to do this to solve the challenges of the invisible and the complex and the accelerating and the constantly changing and the stressful?
Great. So we have so far three core elements of DVL: primacy of sense of vision, content, context. These are two ways of thinking. Combination of skills as a form of hybrid literacy. What's next, David?
I think that we keep talking about technology.
Oh, we keep using it.
So, what's that?
We keep using it all the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we ought to really dive down into that and realize that the idea of, I'll give us a title here. Yeah.
There are different ways you can communicate with technology. And the earliest way that we used technology for communication was to just use text. Now, we can think of technology as helpful in communication using images, right? We have other ways of communicating, like we can use video chats, right? Oh, before that, I should add voice communication.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, we had phones a long time before we had videos.
Exactly. But there's one modality, we call it way of communicating, that is missing here. Would you like to take a guess, David, what that is? We're actually, no spoilers, but we're using it.
Wouldn't be a guess, because I already know, Bart.
We're using space. We're actually accessing the same canvas. That is the space that we use to share our thoughts together.
Right. And so instead of the space being two-dimensional, instead of the space just having two dimensions, like when our great ancestors were drawing on the walls of caves, our space is now three-dimensional, and it even crosses time. Our space can go anywhere. It's like this ribbon that's hyperdimensional, it's only up to our imagination.
Yeah, it might be. I'm still using iPad. I don't know about you. That's
Yes,
my
but
device here.
but but we're utilizing the space.
Two-dimensional.
No, but we are utilizing the space that's between us,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But speaking of DVL, I mean, these are like four core elements that form its roots. I guess there is one more we could add because it's so important. And you mentioned that before when we were speaking about the roots. What was that exactly?
Well, it's so important in this stressful world we live in, where there's so much complexity and there's so much going on, and there's a lot of competition and a lot of uncertainty. And that fifth idea, that fifth root, if you will, is whatever force is going to get us all to work together on the same page so that we can cooperate at the next level that we need to keep our world alive and running and healthy and sustainable. So I don't think we're ever going to be living in a world without competition, but I think greater and greater forms of collaboration and working together, as we've seen just in the forms of cooperation that have been so important here in the US, just amongst our medical system and our hospitals in order to fight COVID-19. We've had to have a greater, more systematic level of cooperation than ever before. And in fact, the solution for these two these two vaccinations was not actually generated in the US. It came from another country.
Yeah, we see it all the time in technology. The knowledge is shared from everywhere. And we see how helpful technology is for us to work across, the spans of time and difference. But you're right. I mean, the capacity is within us. It's just a matter of how we're using it. And the culture of today does not make it easy for us, because we have this trend on being individuals, and more fragmented society is not helpful to get our gig together, so to say. And there's actually a movie that has a dramatized version of the same message that we're calling here as an ingredient of DVL. Do you remember that movie? Have you seen it?
Oh, Arrival's fabulous. Yeah. It was get your act together, people. That's what the theme of that movie was.
But then again, for us, what we're showing here with the use of technology, we're getting on a not trivial problem of resolving complexities, using the space, using technology.
I would say that if this is pointing, like those arrows are pointing to something, it would be pointing towards, in terms of a business theme, it would be pointing towards what we call buy-in. That we're all on the same page, and that we're ready to go with a solution that we are all clear about and agree to. That's really what buy-in is, whether it's used for sales purposes or mobilization purposes, right? It's, are we all going in the same direction and ready to act in a concerted way that produce a desired outcome?
And we can only agree on the outcome and on direction if we can answer questions like, how does it look like to
exactly.
you?
How does it look like? What does that look like to you?
Instead of closing ourselves in the echo chambers, right? So getting this alignment, as you wrote here, requires new tools and new methods to communicate and exchange different perspectives to get the collaboration going.
So these 5 ideas, these 5 roots, if you will, if we think of them as roots, right?
Okay.
To something that's going to grow out of those roots. I also think of these as capacities, right? They're all capacities that are either within us from birth or within us culturally, or maybe we learn them. but they're also the capacities that are afforded to us by our greater use of technology. So if these roots sort of form this collective capacity, then something in the way of a pretty formidable tree, I would imagine, right, is going to come from these roots, right?
And next up, the rewards of digital visual literacy that we will explore together in the crown of our tree model.